Salut tout le monde, on se retrouve pour une interview exclusive en ce premier jour de l'année et qui de mieux pour un premier jour que d'accueillir le premier triathlète à avoir bouclé un Ironman, j'ai nommé Monsieur Gordon HALLER. Gordon, bonjour, merci d'être avec nous sur la chaîne du triathlon, on espère que tu as passé de bonnes fêtes de fin d'année.
Good morning and good evening because you're in evening now.
En 1978, tu étais le premier à boucler la distance Ironman sur un triathlon. Tu étais à l'époque engagé dans la marine américaine. Pourrais-tu nous dire combien de temps tu as servi et où tu as servi?
It was 3 years active duty and 21 years as a reservist. And I retired in 1994 out of the Navy. The first 2 years of active, I was in Hawaii, surprisingly, because I asked for it. And then I got transferred to California, Long Beach. So I didn't really go very far in the Navy, but some of my other military duty, I ended up going all over Europe, and I've been to Japan as well. So got around a little bit.
Comment as-tu entendu parler de la course? Quelles ont été tes premières impressions concernant les distances? Et quand as-tu décidé de t'inscrire?
I first heard about it when I was running the I ran the Marine Corps Marathon, where you saw my personal best. A month later, I was in Hawaii running the Honolulu Marathon, but I had a hamstring problem, so I dropped out. But where I dropped out was where a friend of mine was standing there watching the race, and he told me about this race they'd invented. When he told me what it was about, I said, I can do that. That's what I do all the time anyway. It's my lifestyle to run, bike, and swim and lift weights all the time. And so I figured it was designed just for me. So I watched the want ads in the newspaper, and when they announced having this meeting at Commander Collins' house, I went over there with 20 other people, and we hammered out what we were going to do.
Dans les années 70, tu étais un des meilleurs marathoniens américains avec un temps de 2h27 sur marathon donc. Tu roulais pas mal sur l'île à vélo et tu nageais un petit peu, mais c'était pas forcément ta discipline de prédilection. Donc quand tu t'es inscrit, quelles ont été tes appréhensions, comment t'es-tu entraîné et étais-tu confiant en tes capacités à ne pas perdre trop de temps en natation par rapport aux autres concurrents?
I had like I said, I had a hamstring injury and dropped out of the Honolulu Marathon. So in January, I was running mostly on a mini tramp, just up and down. And I was working at the Nautilus Fitness Center. And they actually sponsored me in the race and supplied my team and all the supplies for the race for me. And so I did a lot of full body weight training with Nautilus equipment. So I got pretty good exercise there. And then I was doing a lot. I probably rode maybe 6 centuries during January. And then in February, I switched it way around. I started running and I ran 187 miles in the 18 days for 17 days of the month leading up to the race. And I cut my cycling down to, I think I rode 7 times with a long ride of 12 or so, something like that. For swimming, the Nautilus took place in most of my swimming. I was working on swim-specific exercises, but I went swimming 4 times, a total of 6,500 meters, and that was my swimming. But in the race, I had a very good paddler. He was only 11 years old, but he was a really good surfer. And the race started at the surf club where his family were members. And so he guided me the 2.4 miles in the ocean. Perfect. A little bit of a smart aleck. We were standing on the beach before the race started, and I asked him if he thought he could do it. And he looked at me and said, "Do you think you can?" So that he did, and I did, and we were fine.
Te souviens-tu des équipements que tu avais le jour de la course?
I remember exactly. Well, for one thing, right now, my brother has the bike that I rode in that first race. I actually had 2 bikes. Nautilus rented a really nice racing bike for me, and I rode that for the first 2/3 of it until we got around the North Shore to Haleiwa. And it had a really small cassette, so I didn't have a low gear to climb up over the mountain. So I used my bike, which had a really big sprocket on the back. And even though it was a heavier bike, it weighed 26 pounds. I had my brother weigh it the other day just for the fun of it. And so I rode up the hill with the lower gear. Even though it was a heavier bike, at least I had the gearing for it. And once I was at the top, it was a very heavy bike, so I went downhill really fast. So so that helped the second half of the ride. Oh, by the way, the Raleigh, that's my favorite brand of bike. The shoes I wore in the run, and I actually have a box with everything I wore in that race. So I wore New Balance 320s for the run, and for the ride I wore the Tiger Oboris, the Japanese. Those are the Asics now, but I wore those shoes. Those are the same shoes I wore in the Marine Corps Marathon when I ran my personal best. And so I figured I just wore them in the bike ride because they had a little stiffer soles. Because we didn't have cleats back then. We just had those leather toe straps. Helmet, we were actually required to wear helmets, but it was basically a leather hairnet, so there were gaps in it. So it wouldn't keep you from dying, but it would keep the mess all in one place. And so they wouldn't have to work so much to clean up if you crashed. So it was rather interesting doing that first one.
Quand as-tu réalisé que ta performance entrerait dans l'histoire du triathlon moderne?
It's kind of funny. After the first Ironman, the only news we saw, the local paper in Hawaii had a couple-page story on it because that's where we were. But anywhere else in the world, the only thing we saw was like one paragraph at the back of Runner's World, and that was it. So the first couple of years, no big deal. The second year, they had the big article in Sports Illustrated, and that got more people that wanted to do it. So in the third year, 1980, Wide World of Sports filmed it. And then the next year, it was because of that extra exposure, we had even more. We had like 350 people in 1981. The real big thing as far as history goes is 82, when Julie Moss crashed and burned at the end and crawled across the finish line. If you've seen the video of her finishing, and you saw Kathleen McCartney run behind her and beat her, there was a guy right in front of Kathleen. That was me. So I get, every time they show that, you see just like 2 seconds of me running across the screen. And then because so many people saw that on Wide World of Sports, everybody got to know what the Ironman was. And then that's kind of where my fame started, and I realized that there was something to this.
Au cours des années, l'Ironman que tu as connu a été quelque peu modifié. Il a changé de nom en 1981 pour basculer d'Ironman à Nautilus International Triathlon, puis revenir à Ironman. Pourrais-tu nous expliquer pourquoi? On sait aussi qu'il a changé d'île, passant d'Oahu à Kona. Est-ce que tu pourrais nous expliquer également les différences entre chaque parcours?
The race name, I'll start with that. The race name was changed to Nautilus International Triathlon because Commander Collins turned over the stewardship of the race, if you will, to Valerie Silk, who, with her husband, owned the Nautilus Fitness Center. So they changed it to Nautilus International. And then in 81 as well, they called it the same thing. But then in 82, they changed it to Ironman again because nobody wanted to be a Nautilus. Nobody wanted to hear as they came across the line, you are a Nautilus. It just doesn't sound the same as you are an Ironman. So that was why the name changed. As far as the venue change, because of the third year growth, and they got so many entries for the fourth year in 81, that it was no longer safe to have the race on the highway, because it's the North Shore of Oahu is only a 2-lane highway, and it gets kind of scary. I've ridden it enough times that even when there was no traffic, it was scary. So it's good to move it to Kona, where there's big wide roads, wide shoulders on the road. And the swim is easier on Oahu because it's in a big bay and the water's more calm, generally speaking. 79 it was, we had 6-foot swells. So, in Kona, you're wide open to the ocean, so you get pretty good waves coming in, and where the trade winds flip around the island, because it's actually on the leeward side, but it's still, the winds are kind of treacherous at that point. As far as the bike ride goes, Oahu is pretty rolling and not that difficult, except for the climb from Haleiwa up to the center of the island and back down. Kona is made up of mostly ups and downs, long and short ups and downs. And as far as the run goes, it's still easier on Oahu because it's part of the Honolulu Marathon course. Pretty flat except for going over the front side of Diamond Head. which really isn't much of a climb at all. But you get to Kona, and while you've got the climb coming out of the energy lab, other than that, the really difficult part about Kona is that it's hotter in places and it's windy. So the bike and the run are harder. Well, all three parts are harder in Kona. Let's just put it that way.
Tu as couru environ 60 triathlons à travers le monde, dont 24 Ironman. Quel a été le plus mémorable pour toi?
If I don't count the first one as my most memorable one, which it obviously would be, I did Lanzarote in 2013, I think it was. And it was memorable because when we started out, it was 45 degrees and pouring rain. A princess from some country, I don't know if it was from Denmark or Spain or what, but she was there, and she and I fired the gun together to start the race, and then I had to run down on the beach and get into the race. But anyway, I was also one of the 20 some odd people that were picked to be in this like a coffee table book of Ironman, but mostly relating to Lanzarote. I had to stop and get my picture taken after coming out of the water, and it's still 45 degrees and raining, and we're wearing our little skimpy tri-suits and shivering. And I remember getting to 1 kilometer into the race, and I'm riding like this and shivering, and I think, oh, only 179 to go like this. And then you got to remember, be careful what you ask for, because before we were done, we had winds of 20 to 50 miles an hour. We had, I don't know, what is it, 8,000, 10,000 feet of climbing, and the temperature went up to 96 before we were done with the bike ride. So they added on an extra hour for the bike cutoff because it was so difficult. Even at that, many people quit after the bike. They didn't even try running. Since I'd been invited over there and I'd been wanting to do it for several years, I stayed to do the run. That's probably a mistake, but the run was flat as a pancake. I was really running out of gas on that and walking a fair amount. Somewhere in about 3/4 of the way in, I just had nothing left. And the sun goes down, and my wife comes out to meet me on the course, and she's wearing her flip-flops and telling me to hurry up, and she's running alongside me in the flip-flops, and I can't keep up with her. This guy catches up with me. I thought I was last, but there's another guy behind me. He caught up with me and said, they're going to let us finish if we don't make the 17-hour cutoff. And I said, well, that's the best news I've heard all day. And I couldn't believe there were hundreds of people that stayed to watch us finish at the end after the cutoff was over. They gave me a finisher's t-shirt anyway, so I count that as a finish.
Tu fais partie du Hall of Fame Ironman. Comment te sens-tu par rapport à cette récompense honorifique?
I guess at the time, having been the first one, I guess that would put me in that category. But then subsequent races, when I see how fast these people are going these days, I mean, my best is 10:58. So these guys are doing sub 8 hours now, and that's a long way to go. Somebody's got to be the first. And although I wasn't the first in the Hall of Fame, there are a lot of people that got in ahead, but, you know, like Dave Scott and Mark Allen, those guys. But they're really good, so they deserve it too, obviously.
On parle bien sûr de toi comme le premier homme à avoir fini un Ironman. Te souviens-tu de la première femme à avoir bouclé la distance?
In 79, Lynn Lemaire. She's a lawyer and also a nationally ranked bike racer and a pretty darn good swimmer. Not the greatest runner, but that's the only reason I beat her is because I had to catch up with her on the run. She's a great person. We were at the same ceremony in San Diego when we were inducted in the Hall of Fame at SeaWorld. Even though they told me in Kona that I was in, but then we didn't actually get the trophy until we got to San Diego later.
Suis-tu encore les actualités du monde du triathlon et quel est ton triathlète favori de tous les temps?
Well, I don't follow it quite as much as I probably should. I did watch the Daytona race the other day while it was going on. That was pretty exciting. And whenever some of my friends here, we have a lot of triathletes here in Northwest Arkansas. There's like 3 or 4 major clubs, including one up in Joplin, Missouri, which is just across the state line from us. And all the clubs help each other out. We know each other, but we're still separate clubs and teams. So whenever anybody from one of those teams, any one of them goes to do an Ironman somewhere and they have the Ironman tracker, so we just follow them and see how they're doing, and then check up on them on Facebook and send them, congratulations or encouragement and stuff like that. But the main reason I'm able to follow everybody is because my wife pays a lot of attention to it and tells me what I should be looking at and keeps me on the straight and narrow. As far as all-time favorite triathlete, I was thinking real hard on that last night, because there's so many people that I admire with their abilities in triathlons. But I think I finally decided that it was Natasha Badman, because I know her a little bit. I have a nice picture, a photo of her and me arm wrestling. But I like her because she's really tough. She always has a smile on her face, even that time when she threw up and got back in the race and finished it. And just seems to be a gutsy but nice person. But I also have another favorite triathlete here. My swim coach is a professional triathlete. She just had a baby this week. She's a professional triathlete and is obviously not currently competing, but she's the main organizer for this charity triathlon we have for the Team Endurance for MS. It's a fundraiser for multiple sclerosis, and she just organizes all kinds of workouts and races and things, and just a phenomenal person.
Tu es un coach certifié Ironman. Aurais-tu des conseils à donner pour un triathlète qui débute sur la distance Ironman?
I've got a couple of tips for training and for racing. The most important tip for training is consistency. Don't skip the workouts unless you've overtrained already, and then you better skip, because the next tip is recovery is part of the training. If you don't recover, then your training starts going downhill. Listen to your coach, trust his methods, and remember that the learning curve doesn't just do that. It goes up and down, and sometimes it stays flat for a while and you wonder what's going on, but your body has to adapt. So it's not a straight line. Just trust that it's going to work as long as you stay consistent. Now for racing, probably the most important thing is stay calm. Don't let the adrenaline drive you too fast, especially on the bike, because you come out of the water and you go too hard, and that's a long way to go if you're out of gas right off the bat. You want to stay calm and get through that okay. When you get to the transitions, stay calm, because if you start getting nervous and you're fumbling around and dropping your equipment and forgetting your number and stuff like that, you've wasted time and energy. The phrase I use for that is go slow to go fast. It's free time if you get through it quickly, but if you go too quickly, you lose time. So you have to practice the transitions.
Quel est ton entraînement favori?
My favorite of all time running workout is just to go out and run for 2 or 3 hours and not cover the same ground twice in the run. I had this run in my hometown in Oregon where I'd see where the mountains were way off in the distance, and I'd run to the mountains and run around the valley and come back home, and it'd be like, I think that was a 22-mile course. And sometimes I'd pick up my brother along the way, we'd run part of it together, and then he'd back to his house, and I'd go back home. But I can't do that anymore. I'm getting too old. My knees are getting too old for that. The rest of me is able to do it. But so now, I have 2 workouts that I really like to do, and all of them include intervals, HIIT type stuff. On the bike, I'll ride multiple sets of 20 minutes of 1 minute on, 1 minute off. So it takes 10 times through that cycle. And I'll let go 5 minutes of just easy pedaling. Then I'll do the next 10 of those and cycle easy. Then I'll do 5 and then 5, because you start to get tired after a while. But for cross training, I liked doing this. I had this brick workout where I would ride 20 minutes, then jump on the trainer, jump on the treadmill, run a mile, get back on the bike and ride 20 minutes and get back on the trainer and do another mile and do that 4, 5, 6 times. And that'd be a pretty good workout. I get 4 to 6 mile run and get 6 times 20 minutes of riding or 30 miles in. And that seemed to work pretty well for that age in my life.
Gordon, est-ce qu'il y a des membres de ta famille qui ont suivi ton chemin?
My son wants to do a 70.3 one of these days. He's done a lot of cycling. He got his first 10-speed when he was 11 years old and went 50 miles with us on his first ride. So he's a pretty good cyclist. So just 2 months ago, he lives in Colorado Springs. And he just rode from there to the top of Pikes Peak and back. So that's a good climb. I haven't done that. I've done another 14er in Colorado, but not that one. He's got really good running form. He could be pretty good at running if he would apply himself a little bit more. My oldest daughter, the one that lives in Ashland, she's a yoga instructor. And so she stays pretty fit with yoga and hiking in the mountains behind their house. And Jessica, my middle child, she's the one that has the 2 grandkids for us. And she was, last year, 2019, she wanted to do a 15-kilometer road race. And so I coached her for a couple of months of that. She wanted to average 9-minute miles, and she hit exactly 9-minute miles for it. So she's always had some running talent. All 3 of them have run track or cross country or both somewhere during their school years. And they all like to stay fit and healthy, and so they're sort of following. And my wife does triathlons. She's done, but more aqua bikes now because running doesn't work so well for her anymore either. It's getting old, it's tough.
Gordon, merci pour cette interview exclusive. On espère te revoir bientôt sur la chaîne du triathlon.
You're welcome and thank you.